Okay, so we're back with Q&A. You asked, I answered. These are questions I found floating around on Facebook writing groups, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to tweak them a little bit and answer them here. I also answer them in those writing groups, so some of my answers are just copy and paste of what I said there, and some of them are like I didn't answer them on the Facebook group, but I did prepare them beforehand, so I actually have something to read, and I'll add anything if I think I can add anything. Okay, so this part 2 specifically, these are questions about world building and description. Now, note that these are all my opinions based on my experiences. I am a fantasy writer, pantser, writer for over 15 years. I hope that I can help even just a little. So, my avatar is wiggling. By the way, you don't have to look at the screen if you don't want to. It's basically a lot of words anyway. Just have me on in the background while you do things. That's the beauty of this. Okay, so there are 3 questions. And you might think 3? Only 3 questions? Well, each question is a lot. So that's why it's only 3 questions. Not only 3 questions. It's 3 questions, and it's enough. So I'll have this up if you do want to look at the screen and read the questions, but I do have the questions. I'll read out the questions when we get to them. Okay, so the first one is how to do world building, especially when it impacts the plot. And when I saw this question on Facebook, I thought, you know what? It's actually an interesting question. I do see a lot of questions about how to do world building. Where do I start? Those types of questions. But this is a more specific question. How to do world building, especially when it impacts the plot. So my answer was something that I took from the what I wrote in response to this person. And I sort of tweaked it a little bit. So I said you'd probably want to think about the aspects of world building which will likely affect the plot and make it easy on yourself. It's how I do it, or I'd get overwhelmed. And I get overwhelmed quite easily. For example, I'd think a bit about politics, a bit about traditions and clothing styles, some culinary culture, and some about the landscape and creatures. What I meant with that was that, see, I'm a pantser, so I usually do some world building for the plot while I am writing the story. So if there comes a scene where the characters are meeting the leader of the world or something, then I think, okay, these are the leaders of the world. How does the politics work? How were these leaders chosen? So I think, I need to think about that. And if I need it in that moment, then I will think about it. But if I don't, I would make a note about that. I need to think about that sometime. It's a mental note. Usually don't write anything down, but maybe I should. So in that particular scene or in that particular moment, then I think about it. So like not just politics, but like I said, culinary culture. If the characters are sitting down to eat a meal, is this food that you can find on Earth as we know it, or is this a fantasy world? Completely fantasy world, meaning it's a fantasy land, and the food that they eat here and get here is also just completely not like our Earth. Or is it similar somehow? So that's when I think about the sort of culinary culture. Also, that's the moment when I think, okay, do they eat with their hands or do they eat utensils? And if they do have utensils, are the utensils made of metal or are they made of wood? So, and then I get into that part of the world building. In terms of world building with culinary culture that impacts the plot, well, maybe the food that they eat is somehow food that is, I don't know, contaminated by magic or contaminated in general or whatever. And the plot is this solving the contamination problem. Who knows what it is, but I hope you get what I'm talking about. So as for world building, like you're beginning the plot and you're beginning the world building, you'd first want to think about setting because the story starts somewhere and it's set in somewhere. So usually I would think about the setting, like, is this era as in horse and buggy era, or is this a high-tech era, or some kind of post-apocalyptic zombie apocalypse type of thing? Then the what the character can do while they are in the plot, what the character can do will change depending on the setting. Like, they can't start using their iPhone to call for an ambulance if there is no such thing as iPhones in your post-apocalyptic dystopian zombie world, for example. So you would want to know where they are in terms of setting, and also in terms of the environment of that world. So setting and environment are kind of really close together, actually. So you would think about, is this a city? Is it a town? Is it a village? And do they have dirt roads? Is it swampy? Is this the seaside? You really want to think. I wouldn't say you really want to do it, because I'm not telling you how to do it. I'm just saying what I would do is think about the era and also the sort of environment, what is around them, and how advanced or not that it is. Also, what is the society like, and where the character stands in the society? Are they influential, or are they just average person, or are they poor? Are they shunned for being poor? That sort of thing. Are they contributing somehow to the society? Are they like a policeman or a soldier, or maybe they're the leader, or maybe they're the leader's spouse or something like that? Or are they in the lowest of the lows? Are they on the fringes of society somehow? They've been exiled for some reason. What is their stand? Like, where do they stand? So once I have those pieces, so I have the setting, I have the environment, I have the what society is like around the character, and where the character stands in terms of their sort of hierarchy, position type of thing. I'm making hand gestures and you can't see me. Then I think, okay, now I have a start. Now I know at least the beginning part of the plot will begin in this setting and will be affected by the character's stance in the society, and what the society is like, and what the environment is like, and what the setting is like. It will all be affected by that, the beginning of the story. So, yeah, I also need to think about if they are working. So like I said, if they are a leader, what exactly does it mean for them to be a leader? Like, what do they do? What exactly do they do? If they are a student, where is their school? Is it school now, or is school out? Do they have homework? Or maybe they're being homeschooled. So exactly where are they? What are they doing? What is their environment? I also think about the weather sometimes. Sometimes I don't. A lot of my stories start out being sunny because I forget that rain is a thing until like halfway into writing the story. Yeah. And I also think, unless the character is outside, like if my character's story starts with them being outside, I only think about what their houses are like once it comes time for them to go home. I don't think about it beforehand. But if they are already home, like the story begins while they are home, then I do think about, okay, what does the house look like? What part of the house are they in at that moment? If they're in their room, what is their room like? What is in their room, or lack thereof? Like, maybe they only have a bed. Why do they only have a bed? And it has to do with the plot of the story. I have this story called The Facade of Quad and Nimrod, which is on Wattpad. You can read it for free. And it's basically a story about this character who is the epitome of failure, and it can't get any worse, can it? Phrase. Which, for the character, things just keep getting worse. So, and his sort of setting, not really setting, but he begins inside the home, but in a different way. He begins as coming home, and then we see him later in his room, which was very, very bare. And that's because he has a gambling problem. He had to sell a lot of his things to pay back the money to his father, from which he stole money from to do his gambling. So, so that is why his room is bare. So I have to think, okay, so his room is bare. And why is it bare? Is because he has a gambling problem. So this gambling problem has to do, sort of relates to the plot, right? In terms of impacting the plot, is his home situation, the setting, or the sort of his relationships with the other characters inside the home, which I guess is kind of like a world. It's a very small world. Also, his relationships with the other people in the society, which is part of the world. So I have to think, okay, so he is considered the lowest of lows in his family. What does society think of him? How do they react to him when he is out and about? And that affects his plot. Impacts. Depending on your story, it might be fun to think about if you want any fantasy creatures, like you can make them up, or you can use ones that already exist in mythology or folklore, like ogres, elves, dragons, fairies, witches, demons, mermaids, etc. So, and the fantasy creatures, they could just be there. They could just be in the world and they don't impact the plot at all. And if that's the case, there might be scenes where the character looks up in the sky and says, oh, today is a good day for dragons. And you learn, okay, there are dragons in this world, but they're not a big deal here. Or maybe they are a big deal. And then in that case, it would probably affect or impact the plot, right? The character seeing a dragon directly impacts the plot. Like I didn't kind of remember. I recall How to Train Your Dragon. I don't know if any of you guys have seen How to Train Your Dragon animated. Pixar, I think. I think it's Pixar. Or is it DreamWorks? Can't remember, actually. Toothless, this dragon, appears, and the dragon appearing in the story impacts the entire plot and created a whole franchise. So something like that. So a dragon could just appear in the sky and be like, oh, it's just a dragon. Or a dragon could appear and be like, oh my gosh, it's a dragon. And now I have to deal with this dragon, but the dragon is hurt. So how can I help the dragon? Are dragons as scary as we thought of them to be? Or are they actually not so bad? And that affects the plot of How to Train Your Dragon. So, yeah. Another thing to think about, maybe, would be like, what the heck does everyone eat and drink all day? Like, if there's lots of fields, maybe there's lots of wheat and apples. Or if they live by the sea, maybe they eat lots of fish. So, in that part, what they eat and drink could affect the plot, depending on what the plot is about. Like, maybe the plot is about some evil, dark figure, creature, thing, has depleted the ocean of fish. Now, if in this world that the characters, they eat fish, like they live on fish, like fish is their thing. But now this evil thing has depleted the sea of fish. So what are they going to do about food now? So the fish culture impacts the plot, because Like if they don't just eat fish, like fish is just, a small part of their diet, but they mostly eat wheat and apples or something like that. Um, and suddenly they don't have fish. I mean, they're a little bit worried about it, but it's not such a big deal because they're not fish people. But if they are fish people, then the fish being depleted is going to affect them. And maybe that is the plot, that is a part of the story that you want to touch on. So if that's the case, then, well, that's the whole plot, right? I hope I'm answering this question. I'm not really sure if I'm answering this question. Other questions that you can ask, like what clothes do they wear? What kind of clothes? Like cloaks, capes, suits, long flowing dresses, tunics, t-shirts, jeans. Or maybe they're like my bipedal animal characters who don't need to wear clothes, but they're covered in fur. You can't see anything. Maybe you want to think about, is there magic in the world? Like if there's magic in the world, like how much does the magic affect things? Like, can the magic quickly grow crops? Can the magic easily bring the fish back into the ocean? Can the magic, I don't know, destroy the zombies or whatever? And if there's no magic, well, then how are they going to destroy the zombies? How are the fish going to come back to the ocean? So magic can also impact plot if you want it to. But of course, you can have a world in which there is magic, but it doesn't impact the part of the plot, the part of the world story that you are telling at that particular moment. So there might be stories in that world that are more magical than other stories in that world. Like I have a world in which there is magic, but there is parts of society where they don't use magic. And so they know that there is magic in the world, but it doesn't really impact their lives very much. Although they are fantasy creatures in that they're animal-human hybrids. So there is something, it feels fantastical, but it's not magical particularly. So you can have magic in your world, but it doesn't need to affect the plot as much if you don't want that to happen. If you want it to happen, then you can have that happen as much as you want. So I think the key thing I do is I ask questions to myself all the time. I asked all the questions. I asked questions about the questions. I ask about everything. And because I'm a pantser, I usually ask these questions as I'm writing. Like I'm writing typey. The character put on weight. What is he wearing? Is he wearing a suit? Is he wearing a cloak? Is he wearing a cape? What is the fashion of this world? What is the fashion of his culture? Why do they wear these clothes? I need to think about it. Is it because of a political reason? Is it a religious reason? Is it just because this character likes fashion and anybody can wear whatever they want? Or maybe they don't usually need to wear clothes because they're bipedal animals, but they like to wear clothes in order to blend into the rest of society. That is something to think about, because if the main character is thinking I have to wear clothes to blend in, how does that impact her traveling through this world? In terms of the plot that I think that this story is going. Am I making sense? I just asked myself a whole bunch of questions. Sometimes I even end up going down a rabbit hole. I end up looking up things that I don't really need to look up in that particular scene moment, but that sometimes does come into play later, and I know I don't need to look it up anyway, so sometimes I do go down the rabbit hole, and then I go down even further rabbit hole, and then before I know it, I'm looking up about something that I don't need at all. Not even down the line. So if you're someone that has trouble, you're not a pantser. Maybe you plot your story. I don't know how plotters work, but if I were a plotter, I might ask questions about myself to sort of practice, maybe. Like, I have a water bottle, but why do I use that water bottle instead of a plastic bottle? Is it because of some beliefs that I have? And could those beliefs that I have affect my plot? Like, if I am a character in a story, which, we could be a character in some writer's story and we just don't know it. So, like, why do I have a water bottle and not a plastic bottle? What if that is part of the plot? Like, asking that question is part of the plot. What if something to do with plastic in my beliefs? Like, oh, I shouldn't use plastic bottle, or I shouldn't keep buying water which is in a plastic bottle. I should just keep refilling my water bottle. And maybe my fight against plastic is now part of my plot. Who knows? Could it be that my dystopian fantasy world contaminated water? And now I have to battle the government because they contaminated my water and my friends are getting sick and dying? And it's up to me to find a solution and save the world, aka the plot? And somehow me using a water bottle instead of a plastic bottle is going to affect me because I'm drinking contaminated water? I'm not saying I'm actually drinking contaminated water, okay? This is all fictional. I'm not drinking contaminated water, I promise. Japan is pretty safe about that. So that is my answer to how to do world building, especially when it impacts the plot. It really depends, things like this really depend on the plot. Like, what exactly are you writing about? Like, you might not even think about fashion in your story if your characters are in the army the entire time and all wearing uniform. You might not think about fashion at all in the entire story. You don't have to, I don't think. Unless you want to, because it's fun. You don't have to think about the food if there are no scenes where your character is eating anything particularly rooted into the culture of their society. Am I making sense? I hope I'm making sense. I'm trying really, really hard to do this, answering this question in a way that I'm not telling you how to do it, I'm telling you how I do it, while also giving some suggestions in ways that you could potentially do it that might potentially help you. You know what I'm saying? I'm not trying to be like one of those writing advice people that say this is the way that you should do it, otherwise you're doing it wrong, because what works for me might not work for you, or it might. We don't know until you try. Or maybe you intuitively know what would work and what wouldn't for you. Anyway, that was my answer to this question. How to do world building, especially when it impacts the plot. What did you think? And let me know how you would answer this question, or if you've even ever thought about this one. Okay, next is there such a thing as being too descriptive? So I see a lot of questions about, is this too much description? Is this too descriptive? All over on these Facebook writing groups. And seems to be a very common doubt that people have. Okay. And my answer was, I don't know if I actually answered this in the group, but my answer is yes. There is such a thing as being too descriptive. But maybe that's your style. Perdido Street Station by China Mayville, in contrast to The Anvil of the World by Cage Baker, of both of which I enjoyed. So, Perdido Street Station is a adult dystopian urban fantasy with some how do you, what is that? It's dark, it's gritty. Some people describe it as being just urban fantasy. I would say it's urban dystopian fantasy. if that's a thing. It's also adult fantasy. This is not a book for kids. Oh my gosh, no way. It's a pretty thick book. I did manage to read the whole thing, though. It is like over 800 pages. I actually have the book with me right now in my lap. Hold on. I'm going to prove it to you. I hope you can hear this. This is book ASMR. You can tell it's a really thick book because it makes a deep sound. So I have Perdido Street Station right here with me. It was written with extremely, extremely descriptive stuff, down to that green vine on that rock over there and a little bit of rust on that wire over here. Including a whole glob of world building and lore and stuff. There was even some moments where it got very sort of technical with some kind of technology stuff. So you could call it a little bit leaning into sci-fi, but unclear how you would describe this genre of the book. The sciencey parts, the techie sciencey parts almost put me to sleep, to be honest, when he was talking about, what was it, like crisis and stuff like that. It's all kinds of stuff, okay? So I'm going to give an example of what I mean by what I think is too descriptive. So this is from Perdido Street Station. I actually wrote the quote. I copy-typed the quote onto the screen so you can actually see it if you wanted to look at the screen. But I have the book right here, and I can actually read from, I can't prove that I'm actually reading from it. I could be reading from the screen, from all you know. For all you know, you knows. For all that yous knows. Okay, so this is chapter 49, and this is towards right at the last part of this book. So it's towards very close to the climax. And what is going on here is basically it's a very tense moment of doing a secret yet urgent job. They have to do it in secret and they have to do it urgently. And when I got to this part, I thought, oh my gosh, I want to know exactly what they're doing. I want to make sure that they're safe. But for some reason, China Miéville decides to be extremely descriptive here too, which was honestly a little bit annoying for me. Like, I want to hurry up and get to the parts where I'm making sure that they're okay. Honestly, I wanted to skip reading the description, but I did read through. I don't want to skip things, okay? I did diligently read every bit of this book. Okay, so chapter 49, it's beginning of chapter 49, and at the very end, 743, starting with the. Okay, the cab stopped by a high wall of rich red brick, from behind which rose an exquisite smell of honeysuckle. Ivy and passion flowers sprouted in little bursts over the lip of the wall, bobbing above them in the breeze. And if I read on a little bit, it was the garden of the Vedne Gehentok Monastery. Oh my gosh, these names. Tended by the dissident Cactaceae and human monks of that floral godling. Okay, so this description of this monastery did not have to happen right here in this urgent moment where they're doing a secret urgent thing, because I wanted to know if they're okay. I didn't care about the description of this monastery, okay? I could care less. You could say the cab stopped, they got out, and they did the job, okay? But he didn't. He is overly descriptive, and that is his style. Okay, so despite my gripe about my supposed gripe about Perdido's the over description of Perdido Street Station, this was such a great book. Like, it gave me book hangover like no other. I still talk about it and recommend it to people who are interested in this kind of book because it's a very unique book to this day. And it's been like a year or so since I last read it, which I do talk about next. But Perdido Street Station is just so much description, but the plot is so well done that it's like, you know what? The too much description part is like the one negative review, part of the review for me, but overall it was a great book. So I did like it. So there is such a thing as being too descriptive, but there isn't such a thing as like, because it's too descriptive, people will hate you for it. I mean, some people might not like Perdido Street Station because it's so descriptive, but there are people like me who can sort of, you know, it's okay. It's okay to be descriptive, because in the end, what mattered to me was the characters and the plot, which was great. So I might not like the description, but I liked the plot, and so that makes me like the book. Interesting. I will put Perdido Street Station on my bed behind me. And now you know that my bed is behind me. Okay, so the next book I want to talk about is lack of description. I wouldn't say total lack of description, because there is some description, okay? In contrast, the Anvil of the World story begins vague yet intriguing. It starts with these children of the Sun People who are supposedly not human, but they sound human. They're implying that they might have yellow skin like the sun, but it's not clear, and not sure how old anyone is, because no one looks their age, apparently. Also, there's demons, but they sound like gremlins, and yet they act like humans, and I'm not exactly sure what they look like. And the towns and streets in this book, they're not detailed either. It's really left up to your imagination. And yet the plot is just so, oh my gosh, it's so wild and unique. And the characters and their interactions are so wacky, but also somehow oddly pleasant. In the end, I ended up enjoying this book a lot. I didn't think when this book started, I thought, okay, this sounds like an interesting book. But as it progressed, I was like, I'm not sure if I'm going to like this book. But by the end, it turned me around again. And this is just such a unique book. Also adult fantasy, by the way. I would consider this adult fantasy, but it's like almost has a fairy tale, fable type of vibe to it. I would warn you that there is a ton of very plainly described, very simply described adult scenes in this book. So if you're not an adult, or if you're uncomfortable reading that sort of thing, which, to be honest with you, I was kind of uncomfortable reading those sort of scenes, this book wouldn't be for you. But if you don't mind it and you'd like to give this book a try, I would recommend it. It was so weird and unique. So anyway, I have the book with me. Hold on. Book ASMR. See, it's a thinner, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a thin book, but it's a thinner book. You can tell because the sound it produces is higher than Perdido Street Station. Okay, maybe I should start like a, this book is thick. Listen to this book, like a book music production or something, I don't know. Anyway, The Anvil of the World, I'm going to read you. I'm actually going to open the book. You don't know that I'm opening it, but I am opening it. This book also doesn't have chapter breaks. It just has scene breaks. So it was hard for me to figure out where exactly to stop with this book. I had to kind of gauge with the what the next sentence was. If the next sentence looked like it was going to start a new scene, then I would say, okay, this is where I'm going to stop. But if it wasn't, I would continue reading. Anyway, this part is actually in the very beginning. It's like, I wouldn't say like first chapter. It's the very beginning. And this is describing one of the main characters. So there's many main characters in this story. It's almost like an omniscient viewpoint. I would say Perdido Street Station is also slightly omniscient or just multi-POV. Not exactly sure, because there was some head hopping. I don't know if there are any moments of head hopping. I don't think there are any moments of head hopping in the Anvil of the World, but it is multi POV or omniscient. I think it's omniscient though, because of this. Let me read this to you. This is page 9 to 10. He belonged to that race called the children of the sun, and like others of his kind, he had skin and hair the color of a sunrise. Okay, so this is in the very beginning, right? This is in the very beginning. And saying the color of a sunrise just stumped me the entire book, because that is the only description you were going to get of this character called Smith, by the way. The only description of him that you're going to get. I was, because I was so confused. What is the color of a sunrise? Is that yellow? Does it mean that he has yellow skin and hair? Or does that mean that what is the color of a sunrise? Like, what does that look like? Does it mean that he's actually blue? I have no idea. It's a very odd description, and it tells me nothing. It's lacking. It's something, truly, but it's also lacking. So, I was just incredibly confused. The entire story, I was figuring out, okay, what exactly does Smith look like? I know it's a guy, supposedly humanoid. Is he human or is he not human? I have no idea. No idea. And he's like the focus character in this book, even though it is somewhat omniscient. And I spent the entire book trying to figure out exactly what he looks like. So during reading, I was actually looking for other descriptions of what he looks like. That's why I say that there aren't any. That's why I can say that, because I was paying attention to that to see if I could find any of that. And there's nothing. There's another odd description thing, very vague. It's on page 85. Thank goodness these pages, this book has page numbers at least, not chapters. This is where we first meet the demon characters. So, at first, the demon characters don't appear to look like demons, but then later they appear to look like demons. This happens quite early in the beginning. Anyway, so, says, behind him, Baunshik, I was reading this as Baunshik, materialized out of the night, regarding Miss Smith and Smith with eyes like coals. She, too, had dropped the glamour. Her skin was like a thundercloud, livid with phantom colors, glorious but hard to look at. What does it mean that her skin was like a thundercloud? Does it mean it's gray? What does it mean that it's glorious but hard to look at? I have no idea. And is there any other description of Baunshik after this? Not particularly. At all, in fact. I mean, there's barely any description about what anyone looks like, how tall anyone is. I think there are a few characters that are described as being shorter than other characters, but then are these other characters extremely tall or extremely short? I have no idea. Nothing. And there's nothing about what any of the places that they go to particularly look like. It's very, very, very vague. So if there's such a thing as being too descriptive, there's also such a thing as being less descriptive. But still, this book was very unique in an enjoyable way. It was very odd and wacky and just like, I don't know how to describe it. Out of this world. It was very weird. Okay, very, very weird. Sometimes it was amusing. I wouldn't say it was funny. It's not particularly comedy, but it was amusing. Nobody, like, you think, okay, these demons might be evil, but they're not particularly evil. There is no particular villain in this story. there's not a particular plot either. Like, I'm not even sure. But you do get to find out what the title means, The Animal of the World. The title was what drew me to this book at the beginning. So this author, Cage Baker, has sadly passed away some years ago. Can't remember when. But listen, this is a great book, and it's quite unfortunate that we'll never get to see books like this, books written by this author. So, I don't know about adult fantasy. I don't think I could ever write adult fantasy, but I kind of want to write a book that is it's just so weird and odd, but you can just roll with it. You can just go with it. It's like, Anyway, about being too descriptive. For me, I tend to describe a lot of nature stuff. So a lot of my childhood, I grew up in or around nature, and I like nature. So I often like to put my characters walking through not stories. They're not walking through stories. Well, they kind of are walking through stories. Anyway, what I wanted to say is walking through forests. They're smelling the breeze. They're looking at the sky. There's lightning. They're feeling warm, cold, maybe, or cultural things like clothes, food, houses, and weather. I don't do a whole ton of room description because I kind of think that less is more for rooms. I don't mind when books describe what is on the walls. Like, some character arrives into a room and they look around what is on the walls, what is hanging, what the table looks like, what the couch looks like, everything. I don't mind when books do that. I just personally don't really do it. I mean, if I say the character is sitting on a sofa, you can imagine a generic sofa, and it's fine with me. You don't have to imagine the exact sofa that I am imagining in my head. It's fine with me. And it doesn't really matter to the story whether they are sitting on a sofa that's green or red. It doesn't matter at all. So that's why I guess I don't really have a lot of unique rooms in my story. There might be things I might add into the room. Like, I might say, like, if it's important to say that this character's house that they went to is a hunter's house, I might say that there's a deer antlers on the wall or something like that. But then you just imagine, okay, generic deer antlers hanging on the wall. I don't care what kind of antlers you imagine, because it has nothing to do with the plot. Unless I'm writing a story about an interior designer, maybe, that's when I would describe the room. But other than that, I don't focus on the room at all. And some people have told me that I should, but in the end, it doesn't matter to the plot. I mean, as long as you can see that they're sitting down and that there's a floor and a table and a door and a couch and maybe some vases on the table, I don't know. That's enough, I feel like. Is that just me? Do people actually want to have the details of the entire room? I don't know. I'm going to put this book on my bed. Okay. So I think in terms of being descriptive, like how much description, how little, there isn't a such thing as too much. There isn't such a thing as too little. What matters is the plot and the characters. That's what we have learned here. So what do you think about this? Is there such a thing as being too descriptive? How would you answer this question? Have you thought of this question before? If not, here's your chance to think about it now. Give me your answers in the comments down below. So I had a drink of water. Okay, now this question was, I didn't have anything pre-written for this. So this is like a half-baked thing. This is about fantasy books in particular. This person was having trouble describing the setting or the backgrounds. Any tips? I also have trouble describing setting and backgrounds. I usually try to imagine, this is kind of related to the description part, isn't it? the description question. I usually try to imagine as best as I can where my character is. Like I talked about, where they actually are in that scene, in that particular scene. If they're in a forest, I try to remember what it was like for me to go to a forest. What do I notice when I'm in the forest? What am I smelling? I breathe in the air. Is it sweet, fresh air? What am I hearing? Do I hear birds? Do I hear that there's cars going by on a road close by? Or do I not hear any of that? Do I just hear the birds and maybe some bugs? When I take a deep breath, does my lungs fill with cool, cold air or warm air? Is there sun coming in through the branches? How dense is this forest? How bright is the sun that's coming in? What is under my feet? Is it squishy? Is there soil? Did it rain? How dense are the leaves? Is the ground beneath me has leaves and so it's squishy? Or is it pine needles and so that would feel different? Do I smell the soil? If I touch the tree bark, is it rough or is it kind of, you know how tree bark gets when it gets wet? It's like I wouldn't say it's mushy, but it does feel a little bit squishy, right? A little bit softened. Like, is it that? Is it actually not sunny right now, but is it actually raining? Is the rain like dripping down the leaves? Can I hear the rain coming through the forest, or is it so dense that I don't hear anything? So I really tried to think about exactly where I am in the story. What is the weather like if I were that character? Like, what is that? Also, depending on the character, they might notice different things. Like, I have my bipedal feline character. She has a very heightened sense of smell, so she might notice other little things. Like she might be able to smell some herbs, wild herbs growing nearby and be able to identify them. And maybe that's what she thinks about. Or she'd be able to smell prey nearby and or hear the little critters in the bushes or something like that. Whereas like a human might not really notice those things. They might think about if they maybe, why are they there even? Yeah, I also have to think about why the character is there. Are they there just, relaxing? They're just there. Or are they there because they've been running away from someone? You might have your senses to listen to the sound of footsteps nearby or not. There might be like, you might be listening to talking. You might be scanning the area, looking for some place that you can hide, and stuff like that. So I am pretty good at imagining things without closing my eyes. In fact, I imagine things better when I don't close my eyes. But maybe you're someone that has trouble with that. So I did think that, well, maybe you can close your eyes like an exercise, okay? You close your eyes and you can feel your desk and you just give all the adjectives, like cool, smooth, hard, scratchy, or you can do it outside. You go outside. You don't even have to step outside. You just open your window and stick a head out. Do you feel the sun? You open your eyes. How is the sun shining? What is it hitting? What exactly are you taking in? Or you just close your eyes and you think, okay, what do you feel on your skin? Like, is it warm? What can you hear? Are there cars going by? Is there laughter? Are the people talking? Can you hear like any music playing anywhere? So you sort of, it's like putting yourself in someone's shoes, right? Practicing to do that. It might be good to do that if you have trouble putting yourself in your character's shoes. So, yeah, describing the setting and background can be pretty difficult. And maybe you can even over-describe in the beginning. And when you go back and edit, you can sort of dwindle it down a little bit. But in the beginning, it's okay to be over-descriptive. And as I said, there's no such thing as too much description, obviously. Given Perdido Street Station is heavily descriptive, but I still really enjoyed the story. And in contrast, the Anvil of the World is just lacking in just so much stuff and is so vague and odd. And I still also enjoyed the story. In the end, it's about plot and characters, but you do still want to immerse your reader into the story. So you do want some description, and it's your choice how much or how little you get into it. So yeah, if you have trouble describing the setting or background, it might be good to do the closing your eyes and doing the adjectives to describe things. Or if you can, imagine yourself in somebody else's shoes, like imagine your character in a forest or somewhere else that you've been, like somewhere familiar. Like, remember when you've climbed a mountain, like you hiked up a mountain. What did that feel like? What were you noticing? What were you smelling? What were you seeing? What were you hearing? And feeling, all the senses. Not you should, but I think it's good to think about all the senses. Even though you might not use all the senses when you actually write the story. You know, I noticed something when reading Perdido Street Station, that moment there. He's using all the senses like in one section. Like he's talking about all the senses every time he describes something. Well, maybe not every time, but a lot of the times. And that can be kind of overwhelming. But that's his style. And in some cases, it's very, very immersive. So immersive that I felt like I was actually there. I was actually there in New Crobazon and seeing the sort of gritty, dark side of the city while also seeing the bright and fantastical side of it. Talk about great writing. Although, it's still too much description. It's still too much description. But it was a great story. Dang, really made you think about. I don't really say dang a lot, but dang, really made me think about just consequences and stuff like that. Because one thing led to another, but cause and effect, yeah, that's it. Perdido Street Station is really a story that uses cause and effect so well. You should read that book if you're interested in what you heard me just talking about just now. So, what would you say to this person who was having trouble describing the setting or background in a fantasy book? What tips would you give? Do you agree with my tips? Do you think they could be useful? Do you have anything you want to add? Let me know in the comments down below. Okay, so that is the end. We tackled 3 questions. I don't know how long this video was. You will see in advance. I will see when I edit this. I mean, I don't really edit my videos. I just sort of cut up the end a little bit. But anyway, these were my opinions, my ways, my things, my suggestions, my experience. What might work for me might not work for you. And keep that in mind. Also, I'm just a fox, and discuss nicely amongst yourselves and stuff like that. And we can also chat in the comments. So, anyway, that is it for this video. This was Q&A part 2, world building and description. If you have any questions that you have as a writer, you can put those in the comments as well, and I could get to them in a video. We could do that. That would be interesting. So anyway, that's it for this video. Please like if you liked it. Subscribe if you feel like it. Tell your friends, writer friends, about my channel, because I'm going to try very, very hard to not tell you this is how you do things, but to sort of say this is how I do it, and maybe open up some discussions and stuff like that, and we can all chat as writers and learn and grow together. Okay, what else do I say at the end? That's it. Have a lovely day, and you will hear me in the next video. The fox is out.